Brachos Daf deals primarily with the correct time for tefillah of Shachris, Mincha, Maariv, and Musaf. The Gemara spends a while analyzing Rabbi Yehuda's shita, whether or not when he gives a time he means including the time or up until the time. The Gemara discusses the source that Shachris has to be up to 4 hours. The Gemara discusses the halacha regarding Mincha, when is the right time for it. The Gemara briefly dips into the sugya of passing in front of somebody who's Moshe and Esrei. The Gemara talks about Maariv, the right time for that, and whether or not Maariv is an optional or obligatory tefillah. The Gemara begins to discuss the famous story about Rabbi Gamliel and how he was removed from being the Nasi, which will continue on tomorrow's Daf. We will begin Brachos Daf Chav Zayin with the last 3 lines of the previous Daf. The Gemara is discussing the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda as to when each of the tefillos of the day are supposed to be prayed. And Rabbi Yehuda had said that Shachris is until the 4th hour, Mincha is until Plag HaMincha, and Musaf is until the 7th hour. These 3 opinions argued with the Chachamim, and the Gemara asks, when he says until, what does he mean? Until and including, or until but not including? So when he says Shachris until the 4th hour, that means that the first 3 hours of the day, but not the 4th? Or does it mean until the 4th hour and including the 4th hour? And the same for all of them. Musaf until the 7th hour, meaning up until the first 6 hours, until the end of the 6th hour, but not including the 7th hour, or until the 7th hour means including the 7th hour. Now with Plag HaMincha, it's a little bit more complicated. Plag HaMincha, let's review, refers to the time between Mincha Kitana, which is 2.5 hours before sunset, and sunset itself. So it's a 2.5 hour length of time. Half of that is Plag HaMincha. The words Plag HaMincha means half of Mincha. So half of Mincha Katana to sunset is Plag HaMincha. Now, it's not clear at this point what half of Mincha Katana, what Plag HaMincha, it's not clear what that means. Does that mean the midpoint? Today, when we say Plag HaMincha, we mean the midpoint. We mean an hour and a quarter before sunset, which is the midpoint of 2.5 hours before sunset till sunset. But the Gemara did not understand Rabbi Yehuda that way. The Gemara understood that Plag HaMincha meant one of the halves. The Gemara understood that. Which half did he mean? He meant the latter half, and up until the latter half of Plag HaMincha, or maybe up until the latter half and including the latter half, which goes all the way until Shkia, because it goes all the way until sunset if you're including the latter half. So the Gemara tries to figure out now what is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, up until or including. So first the Gemara discusses Plag HaMincha. The Gemara says, you see from the fact that Rabbi Yehuda says up until Plag HaMincha, and we've established that it means the latter half, so that must mean up until but not including. Because if it meant including, if it's including the latter half of Plag HaMincha, the latter plag, the latter half, that goes all the way up until sunset, that's the same as the opinion of the Rabbanan, who he's supposed to be arguing with, who hold that it goes until sunset. If he also says that it's up until and including the latter half, then it's also up until sunset. So this clearly shows that when he says up until, he means not including, and that should apply to the other tefillos of the day as well. The Gemara says, I hear, but let's take a look at the other thing he said. He said that Musaf you can say up until the 7th hour. If it means up until but not including, that means up until the 7th hour, meaning it has to be said within the first 6 hours of the day. If that's true, then it can't be said 6.5 hours into the day, which is when Mincha starts. The time for Mincha begins after 6.5 hours of the day. But it can't be, because we have a brisa where Rabbi Yehuda says if somebody is in the time of the day where he could either be davening Musaf or Mincha, he should daven Musaf first because the time passes and Mincha goes longer. So they brought on argue, they say that Mincha should go first because it's more commonly occurring than Musaf. But how could Rabbi Yehuda say that there's a time which Mincha and Musaf overlap? If you're right that Mincha begins at 6.5 hours into the day, and Musaf ends, according to Rabbi Yehuda, at the 7th hour, meaning at the beginning of the 7th hour, meaning at the end of the 6th hour, then there is no overlap. The time for Musaf ends half an hour before the time for Mincha begins. So that's a clear indication that Rabbi Yehuda holds that there is an overlap, which means that Musaf continues until the end of the 7th hour, and therefore every time he says up until X time, he means up until and including. So when he says up until the 7th hour, when he says until the 7th hour, he means the first 7 hours of the day, including the 7th hour. So the Gemara says, you're right. Rabbi Yehuda really means up until and including. So Musaf, he says the 7th hour means that means the entire first 7 hours of the day, including the 7th hour. Plag HaMincha, what he meant was as follows. He didn't mean Plag HaMincha up until and including the second half of Plag HaMincha. He meant including the first half of Plag HaMincha. When he said Plag HaMincha, he meant the first half, up until and including the first half, which means up until an hour and a quarter after Mincha Ketana, which is also an hour and a quarter before sunset. So the Gemara says, and this is what was meant when we defined Plag HaMincha as being at 10 hours and 45 minutes into the day. We meant that is the midpoint between the two plags, which is what we're calling Plag HaMincha. The Gemara now says we can establish that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. We have a brisa which Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, a different person, says, I can testify to 5 halachas that I saw. Number 1, you can teach a ketana, a girl who's a child, sometimes to do miyun. Miyun is a process by which a girl who is married in a rabbinical marriage, not a deraisa marriage, can walk out and cancel the marriage without a divorce document. There are certain times where the chachamim tell her to do that, such as a case where her sister fell to yibum, to her husband, and there's a problem with her rabbinical marriage, and therefore we have to advise her to cancel it. Second halacha that he said he can say witness to is that a woman whose husband had disappeared and there's only one witness who says that he died, you can marry her off based on the word of the one witness. Third halacha, there was a time when a chicken was stoned in Yerushalayim. The halacha is that if somebody's animal kills a person, that animal is given skila. It wasn't clear if that halacha applies only to an ox, which is where it said, or it applies to other animals as well. He says it was a case where a chicken pecked the skull of a child and killed it, and they gave skila to the chicken. The next halacha that he says is that wine is fitting to go on the mizbeach 40 days after squeezing from the grape. After 40 days of fermentation, it is no longer considered to be grape juice, and it's fitting to go on the mizbeach. And now the fifth halacha, which is relevant to us, is that he says that the carbon tamid was brought bi'arba sha'is, in 4 hours. Now, the only opinion that restricts it to 4 hours is Rabbi Yehuda of our Mishnah. So this Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is holding like our Rabbi Yehuda, and he says in 4 hours. In 4 hours doesn't mean up until 4 hours and not including the 4th hour. He clearly includes the 4th hour as well, and that is an established fact that that's what Rabbi Yehuda holds. Now the Gemara says the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda because his Mishnah is listed in Maseches Idios, which is a collection of the unargued, uncontested brisas and Mishnahs that are absolute halacha. The Gemara now quotes a Mechilta, which is used to establish when the time for the carbon tamid is. And the Gemara will say that this, it doesn't fit neither in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and neither in that of the Rabbanan. And the Gemara will question who it could possibly be. The Gemara will resolve it. What's the Mechilta? The Mechilta says as follows. How do you know this concept that 4 hours is the right time for kabbanis? Meaning, how do you know that the 4 hours is considered morning and after that it's not considered morning anymore? The carbon tamid is supposed to be brought in the morning. So the Gemara, the Mechilta, turns to the Torah's description of the collection of the mun. The Torah says they collected the mun Baboiker, uses the word morning twice, and then after Boiker had ended, it says V'cham hashemesh v'names, and the sun got hot and the mun melted. So the Gemara says, okay, so you see that after morning, the sun melts the mun. Now, how do I know that that's 4 hours? Well, let's go a little further. When Avram sat at the entrance to his doorway, it says Kechaim Hayoim. So concerning the mun, it says Cham Hashemesh. Here it says Chaim Hayoim. What is the meaning of the different language? Cham Hashemesh means that it's only hot in the sun. In the shade, it's cool. Chaim Hayoim means it's hot even in the shade. And earlier than Cham Hashemesh, it's cool even in the sun. So what is the time period of the day where it is no longer hot, where it's not hot in the shade, but it is hot in the sun? That's 4 hours into the day. That is what the Mechilta determines it as. Now, the Gemara asks that here you have the Mechilta, which clearly says that 4 hours is after the morning. So that's not anybody's opinion. According to the Chachamim, 4 hours is in the middle of the morning. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we just said that he holds Advad B'chlal. He holds that 4 hours is included in the morning. So who is this opinion? So the Gemara says really could fit in either of them, because if you look carefully, the pasuk said Baboiker. 2 mornings. What is the meaning of Baboiker? So I can tell you that it's a Rabbanon, and the word Baboiker splits it into 2 halves of the morning, and they only collected the mun in the first half of the morning, and then afterwards it melted, but it was still considered morning, and therefore morning goes all the way till concise. Or I can tell you that it's Rabbi Yehuda, and the extra word Boiker comes to add an hour to the morning, that they collected an hour less. We have an hour more, and they collected an hour less. It's to take an hour off, and therefore they finished collecting an hour before the end of the morning, and that was when the sun began to melt it. The next section of the Gemara wants to know how we paskin in the Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim about the right time for Mincha. The Gemara will move from there into a discussion of passing before somebody who's in the middle of Shemona Esrei and the halacha of being Makabel Shabbos early. So let's see what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, okay, we've established that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda as far as Shachris. What about Mincha? The Chachamim said you can say Mincha up until sunset, and Rabbi Yehuda said up until Plaga Mincha, which we defined as the midpoint between Mincha Ketana and sunset, which is an hour and a quarter before sunset. So the Gemara says, Rav Chizda asked Rav Yitzchak, and he didn't know the answer. So they tried to prove from the fact that Rav was Makabel Shabbos early, and he davened Shabbos Ma'ariv during the day. So you see that you are allowed to daven Ma'ariv before sunset, which means that Rabbi Yehuda must be right. At the time for Mincha ends an hour and a quarter before sunset, and then afterwards, even though it's not sunset yet, you can already daven Ma'ariv. So the Gemara says, hold on a second, but that was what Rav did. But Rav Huna and Rabbanon did not daven Ma'ariv early. So you see that the halacha is not like Rav Yehuda, and that up until sunset, you cannot daven Ma'ariv yet, it's still Mincha time. So the Gemara says, okay, so we do not know what the halacha is, and therefore the final psak is that you can do it either way. The Gemara now relates to an incident. Rav went to the house of Geniva, and he was Mispalel early. He davened Shabbos Ma'ariv before sunset, and Rabbi Yirmiyah, who was sort of like his Talmud, was standing directly behind him, and he was doing his own tefillah, which was mincha, and Rav finished, and he did not interrupt Rabbi Yirmiyah. He stood still and didn't walk by. So we see from here three halachas. First of all, we see that a person is allowed to daven Ma'ariv early before sunset. Second of all, we see that a Talmud is allowed to stand Shemona Esrei directly behind his Rebbe. And you see from here that you're not allowed to pass, you're not to walk in front of somebody who's in the middle of tefillah. So the Gemara challenges these halachas. The Gemara says, first of all, Rabbi Shua ben Levi agrees with this because he said that it's forbidden to pass in front of somebody who's in the middle of Shemona Esrei. The Gemara asks that Rav Ami and Rav Asi did pass. The Gemara says Rav Ami and Rav Asi only passed 4 amas away. Within 4 amas, they did not pass. And the Gemara says, what about this that Rabbi Yirmiyah stood directly behind his Rebbe? We have a maimer from Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav that a person is not allowed to stand Shemona Esrei directly behind his Rebbe or next to his Rebbe. It's considered to be a chutzpah. So the Gemara also adds to that Rabbi Eliezer has a brisa which said that somebody who greets his Rebbe by saying Shalom Alecha and does not say Shalom Alecha Rebbe, or somebody who argues with his Rebbe's position, or somebody who says something over that he did not hear from his Rebbe, all these things cause the Shechina to leave Yisrael. So how could Rabbi Yirmiyah stand directly behind his Rebbe? The Gemara answers Rabbi Yirmiyah was not really a Talmud of Rav, he was a Talmud Chaver. He was somewhat of an equal. The Gemara says that explains another incident where Rabbi Yirmiyah saw that Rav had said Ma'ariv of Shabbos early while it was still Friday, and he asked him, did you stop doing Malacha? And he did not say, did the master stop doing Malacha? So you see he was a Talmud Chaver, not just a Talmud. The Gemara now follows this train. Over here the Gemara says that Rav had answered him, yes, I stopped doing Malacha. Since I already did Shabbos Tefillah, I stopped doing Malacha. The Gemara asks, is it true that he stopped doing Malacha? But we have a statement of Rav Avin that once upon a time Rebbe davened Shabbos Tefillah early, and then he went to the bathhouse. So that's malacha. How is he allowed to do that? It's forbidden to take a bath on Shabbos. The Gemara says no, he didn't go there to take a bath. He went there just to sweat. It was important to sweat for his health. That is also forbidden to do on Shabbos, but that's a Gzeira D'Rabbanan which started later. So at the time, it wasn't usher. Then the Gemara says, but I have another case. Abaye allowed Rav Dimi to smoke clothing in a basket as part of the laundering process after he davened Shabbos Ma'ariv. So that's clearly a malacha. So the Gemara says, no, that was a different case. That wasn't that he was Makabel Shabbos early. That was a mistake. They had thought that it was already nighttime, and that was because it was very cloudy, and then the clouds parted, and they could see that it had not been Shabbos yet. Shabbos had not yet begun. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. But even if you daven early by mistake, it still counts. And you do not have a right to go back to assuming that it's during the day. Proof is that there was an incident where people thought that Shabbos was over, and they davened the Matzah Shabbos Ma'ariv, and then the clouds parted, and they saw that it wasn't yet. They asked Rebbe what to do, and he said, well, if you davened already, so you don't have to go back and daven again, the Ma'ariv counts, even though it was early by mistake. The Gemara says, that doesn't prove that in our case, if you made a mistake and you daven early, that you have to start keeping Shabbos. It's very different. That was a tzibur, and Rebbe said the tzibur does not have to be matriach hazav, doesn't have to bother herself to daven Ma'ariv over again if it davened early by mistake. But in case of an individual who started Shabbos early because he thought that it was Shabbos, and then it became clear that it wasn't, he's allowed to go back to doing melacha. The Gemara now asks somebody who davens early, what does he do about Kiddush and Havdalah? So the Gemara says that Rav Chia bar Avin used to say Shabbos Tefillah early, and Rabbi Shaya used to say Matzah Shabbos Tefillah early on Shabbos. And the Gemara says that each of them said Kiddush early and Havdalah early, respectively. And the Gemara quotes Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel that the halacha is this way, and there was a brisa that one is allowed to say Kiddush early and Havdalah early, even if one has said the Ma'ariv before sunset. Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rav Yossi, stood next to a certain pillar on Erev Shabbos, and he davened Shabbos Ma'ariv. So Ula came and they said, listen, you have the details of the story wrong. It was not next to the pillar, it was next to a tamara, a date tree, and it wasn't Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi, it was Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Yossi, and it wasn't that it was Friday night tefillas early, it was Motzei Shabbos tefillas early on Shabbos. The Gemara now discusses the next phrase in our Mishnah, which had said that Ma'ariv does not have a kvad, does not have a set time. So the Gemara wants to know, what does this mean, Ma'ariv doesn't have a set time? So the Gemara's first obvious attempt is that it means that Ma'ariv you can say the entire night. The Gemara says, if that's what it means, so then say straight out, Ma'ariv you can say the whole night. What is this, doesn't have a set time thing? So the Gemara says that this Man Omar holds that Ma'ariv is not an obligatory tefillah, it is optional. The Gemara says that this is actually a machlokes between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Gamliel says Ma'ariv is obligatory, and Rabbi Yeshua said it's optional. Abaye said the halacha is that it's obligatory, and Rava says the halacha is that it's optional. The Gemara now quotes a long incident that happened with Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel, which will run deep into the next blot, tomorrow's daf. So we'll start it here. The Gemara says that a Talmud came and asked Rabbi Yeshua, is Ma'ariv optional or obligatory? He said it is optional. Then he went and asked Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi. He was the leader at the time, and he asked him the same question, and he said it's obligatory. So he said, what do you mean? Rabbi Yeshua told me that it's optional. So Rabbi Gamliel was apparently upset, and he said, let's wait until the Talmidei Chachamim come into the yeshiva, and then we will deal with it. So when they all came in, by the way, the Gemara refers to the Chachamim as Ba'alei Trisin, the carriers of the shield, because they fought each other in halacha. Anyway, the story continues that Rabbi Gamliel waited until everybody was in the yeshiva, and he stood up and he said, everybody should know that Ma'ariv is obligatory. Then he challenged the crowd. He said, is there anybody here who disputes this ruling? Rabbi Yeshua spoke up and he said, no. Rabbi Gamliel said, I was told that you dispute the ruling. So Rabbi Yeshua said, look, if I would be alive and the person who said that I disputed it not alive, then I could deny it, but we're both alive, and he says that I said so, so I can't deny it. And Rabbi Yeshua admitted, apparently reluctantly, that he did dispute it, and he held that Ma'ariv is a reshus. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Gamliel ordered him to stand on his feet. And Rabbi Gamliel began to say the shir, and he continued to say the shir, and the custom was that if you are told to stand, you're not allowed to sit until the Nasi gives you permission to sit, and Rabbi Yeshua remained standing. And it was a painful experience for Rabbi Yeshua. The Gemara says that the crowd that was there was offended on Rabbi Yeshua's behalf, and they told the Meturgamin, who was the one who announced Rabbi Gamliel's shir in a loud voice, to stop, and he stopped, and therefore Rabbi Gamliel's shir ground to a halt. So the Gemara says that the people there, the Chachamim, were upset at Rabbi Gamliel's handling, and they said to each other, this is the third time that Rabbi Gamliel has punished Rabbi Yeshua excessively. There's one incident in Rosh Hashanah where Rabbi Yeshua gave up psak on what day Yom Kippur was. Rabbi Gamliel argued, and he ordered Rabbi Yeshua to appear before him with his wallet and his cane on the day that he held was Yom Kippur. And then there was another incident concerning a Bechor that belonged to Rav Tzadok, and there a similar thing happened that Rabbi Gamliel ordered Rabbi Yeshua to stand on his feet for a long time. And now we have this. So the Chachamim decided that they want to remove Rabbi Gamliel from the post of Nasi. And then they said, okay, 1 second, if we're going to remove him, who are we going to replace him with? So Rabbi Yeshua, that couldn't be because he's the one who caused this entire thing. That would be too much of an offense to Rabbi Gamliel to have Rabbi Yeshua himself replace him. What about Rabbi Akiva? Can't do that. Rabbi Akiva doesn't have schus avos. His parent, he's descended from Gerim, and if Rabbi Gamliel will be upset and cry out to Hashem, he may cause the death of Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says that they decided on Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah because he was a chacham, he was very wise, he was also rich, which the Gemara says was important because if you have to deal with Rome, you have to be rich, and it is the job of the Nasi at times to deal with Rome. And he also, at Chosavos, he's descended 10th generation from Ezra Sefer. So therefore, even if Rabbi Gamliel will try to punish him, he wouldn't be able to. So the Gemara says that they offered the position to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and he went home and he consulted with his wife. And his wife said, listen, they're going to give you a job today. Tomorrow they'll throw you out. So Rav Elazar said, and if they do, what's the problem? It's worthwhile to drink from a fancy cup, even just for a day. If I get the job for one day, then it's worth it. So she said to him, but your beard is all black. You don't have a single white hair. How are they going to respect you? So he said, I hear. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu made him a nace, that all his hair, his beard, and everything turned white overnight. And that is why Rabbi Elazar said in the previous Mishnah, which we had in the Masechta, he said, Harei ani ki ben shiv mishana, I'm like 70 years old. He didn't mean I'm approximately 70 years old. He meant I look like I'm 70 years old.